Good morning to engaging and empowering school libraries and FOSIL education and school libraries. Today I'm bringing together both of my co-hosts on my different podcasts to eventually get together and actually talk about the nitty-gritty of FOSIL in practice. If you listen to this podcast regularly, you'll notice that in my introduction I tend to say and bring people together who are using it. This is the moment. So I'm really delighted to be joined by both co-hosts from both podcasts, Ruth Maloney and Daryl Tyrion. So we'll start with Ruth. How are you, Ruth? Are you well?
Very well. Yep. Enjoying a murky November morning. Yep.
Good stuff. And you, Daryl? You okay?
Yes, good. It's been quite a eventful week because we had interviews for our new principal on Thursday and Friday.
Exciting.
So are waiting patiently for the outcome. So yes, we're facing a new chapter. Probably from the beginning of next week, we'll have some idea. So it's exciting, but as always, change is not it's not comfortable.
No, it isn't. My big news.
But we're excited. We're excited.
Good. My big news is I became a grandma again for the 7th time. They're keeping me young, put it that way. Anyway, on to FOSIL. Can I start with Ruth then? Having used it in practice, there are some questions, which is great because actually it's not until you actually try and do something that you notice the complications or the barriers, and we all might be very, this is definitely the way we want to go, but there are, understandably, it's not always smooth sailing, is it?
No, it's not. And I think it's a multitude of things, if I'm honest. I think I'm never entirely sure, we all know what being a school librarian is like. You're not doing one thing and one thing only. And you're not, therefore your mind isn't ever only on one thing. And there are times when I think, right, okay, I need to move my thinking on. Elizabeth, you and I have had conversations about how you manage your time and blocking out parts of your day. And there are parts of my day that are blocked out for FOSIL and that kind of thinking. But I sometimes find myself getting to that time of day and thinking, I'm not sure I've got this entirely straight in my mind because it's not all encompassing for me. And so I got in contact with you a while back and said, I feel like I have gone back in my thinking about FOSIL miles and miles and miles, and I'm not ever got this fundamental right. And you said, let's get together and talk to Daryl. So here we are. It's to do with sort of practical implementations, really, I think. I find I'm never sure whether I am FOSILing or whether I am simply teaching the skills in isolation with this idea that they are part of inquiry learning. And I look at what you're doing at Blanchland, Daryl, and what you did at Oakham, and I think, wow, that looks amazing. But I feel from you a whole school buy-in, which I sort of have and sort of don't have. Many of you will know that we are an IB school, and that and therefore there is an understanding and a drive for inquiry-based learning, but it doesn't come with an attachment to FOSIL. Although, Daryl, you will be pleased to hear that we had the IB inspectors, the monitoring review 2 weeks ago, and I managed to get FOSIL into that and said, how important it was and how much I wanted to work in more into our curriculum. They were very interested. You got a note there. But I feel as though I am dropping into the lessons, teaching something at various stages, developmentally, in year groups as we go up the school. I'm embedding it in their curriculum. I'm not teaching, I don't teach library lessons, but I'm not ever involved either in a full inquiry or in teaching this as part of, as even the first beginning steps of an inquiry. Am I doing FOSIL, or am I doing, standard digital and media literacy skills? I want to think I'm doing FOSIL. Am I?
So, yeah, I think that, so there are a couple of really interesting and important things that come out of those questions. And you'll be encouraged to hear, I hope, that I still wrestle with exactly the same things. I think I've always been wrestling with what FOSIL is and represents. So even as a teacher before I became a librarian, but certainly when I moved to Oakham in 2008, I think that was when that journey really did begin to accelerate through to 2011, when I developed that cycle based on Barbara's work. So just before that, to say, I think it's entirely appropriate that you said you've gone back in your thinking, because I just remembered as I was looking at the questions that we had an opportunity to meet in 2019 at the SLG Regional Training Day at Drill Hall, which I think is the University of, is it Greenwich?
University of Kent, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So I still remember that meeting, and in fact, that was shortly after the formation of the FOSIL group, and the whole point of the FOSIL group was to create opportunities for people who were interested in and on a similar journey to be able to share stuff. So in that sense, it's really good to be reflecting on where we've come from in terms of what we're trying to do. So that was a special day, not least because we had an opportunity to meet in person. And then the second thing is, I think in order to answer these questions properly, I'm hoping, Elizabeth, that it might be possible. I know that there's a podcast, but that there's also an opportunity for people to view a video recording if they want to. And I'm just wondering, under the circumstances, whether it would be possible to share my screen in this one instance, just so that we can talk through Ruth's questions in greater detail.
Yeah. That's fine. The link to the YouTube video will be posted in the show notes below. So carry on. Go on. Off you go. Share your screen, Daryl.
Okay. So is that okay?
It is. That's great. Yeah, we can see it.
So I think I think the best way to approach Ruth's questions, because I think there are two levels. So the first level, I think, is the whole school buy-in, and the second level then is practically what you do day to day on the ground.
Yeah.
And I think maybe in terms of, if we start off with the whole school buy-in, I would be very surprised if there are many, if any, schools where that whole school buy-in is total and complete. So that is always going to be a work that is more or less in progress. So neither at Oakham, which offered the IB diploma alongside A-levels, and in the years before we left to come to Blancheland, introduced the 3-year MYP. So even there, I wouldn't say that we'd achieved a situation where everybody was approaching what they were doing in the same way. But we had certain levers, one of which was the fact that we were doing the IB and that there was some kind of inquiry stance and project in the MYP and certainly the DP. So there were levers. And then we had, interestingly, a mix of IB-minded teachers and non-IB-minded teachers, some of whom were actually teaching in the IB program.
Yep.
And that, I think, begins to bring us to the second question, is where those two questions then intersect, because it's increasingly clear to me that not all librarians view what they do in the same way. So for librarians who are interested in what we're talking about, we're always going to need to be a witness to a different educational reality. And there are certain tools that we have at our disposal, one of which we're looking at now, and I'll share the other most obvious one in a minute. So we have certain tools that help to elevate what we're doing from just skills to a learning process. And also we will have opportunities within the curriculum, and we will have certain colleagues and possibly even entire departments who may be similarly minded. And I think for as long as we remain librarians, we will be engaged in a work that is more or less in progress.
Okay. So if I understand you right, you are, as from a, I don't want to get you wrong, I don't want to be, my understanding then is what you're saying is that we are in fact teaching, we may find ourselves teaching these skills that sit within the cycle as standalone chunks, effectively, whilst recognizing and reinforcing their place with the students in this cycle.
Yes.
So that when we are talking about them, we are constantly reinforcing their role in the cycle of FOSIL. And so the fact that we teach them, you know, Elizabeth and I have talked about being in for part of a lesson, 10, 15 minutes at the beginning of a lesson or the end of a lesson or whatever, to teach something which sits within the larger content that they're being taught. And while we are doing that, we are saying to them, this is the stage of the research process that you are at, as far as we are concerned. Then whether that's really recognized beyond the library and beyond the teacher who's allowed us into the classroom isn't as important. Is that correct?
Yes. So that is one of the two things that I think we need to take away from this is the skills are part of a process. So whenever we have an opportunity to teach about skills, we have an opportunity to locate those skills within a process.
Yep.
So even so on this level that we're looking at now, if you are doing, so even on this level, if you are doing anything that relates to finding information, then we are largely concerned with investigate.
Yep.
However, it's impossible. Well, so as soon as citing and referencing is necessary, and I'd like to think within most contexts, some degree of citing and referencing will be necessary. So even though in terms of the process, there's no formal requirement in investigate to record bibliographic details, the fact that you're going to have to do that in express, where citing and referencing is a formal requirement. So even there on that level, it's impossible to do one stage without another.
Yes, indeed.
So then that becomes an opportunity, not just for the students, but also for the teacher to keep lifting what you're doing up beyond the skills themselves onto a learning process. So what has come before that is now requiring you to do this, and what must come after? So even if you're going to have some time to do investigation skills and express skills, even if that is just citing and referencing, there is an opportunity to ask them about what happens in between, because they need to be making sense of the information in investigate, and that has to have meaning for them if they're able to, if they are going to be able to express what they've learned. So there's an opportunity to talk about construct, even if it is just drawing their and their teacher's attention to that.
Yep.
And then I think the second thing there is, so that's on the level of skills.
Yep.
But it is also possible to bring an inquiry stance into everything that we do. So the inquiry stance is a sense of wonder and puzzlement that leads to a learning process, a process of learning about something. And that is either through direct observation and experience, or more commonly through recorded information. So as soon as we are encouraging students to be amazed, to be puzzled, to have a sense of wonder and puzzlement, and as soon as we are stimulating them to ask questions that they are then in the process of finding answers to, we're introducing an inquiry stance. And that then slowly begins to change the culture of the school and of the classes that we teach. And in fact, it begins to change the way we view what we do and the way that we approach it.
So can I can I jump in?
Absolutely.
So if I understand it right, Ruth's been asked to go and teach a particular tool in a classroom setting in a geography lesson. So at the moment that she is in front of the class talking about that tool, she should be saying, we're going to use this as part of investigate, as part of FOSIL. And we already have our questions which have come from wonder, and where we're thinking about what we want to know. And once we've looked at this tool, we want you to think about, what does it mean to you via construct? And it could be as simple as that. You then go on and start teaching the lesson about, or teaching that tool. Is that right? Have I got that right?
So that's exactly right. And that's why if I change the what we're looking at on the screen now, because this is the highest, simplest level to relate to the inquiry process on. But the whole reason then why we develop the skill sets is because it's a it's a helpful step for both us and for the colleagues that we're working with and for the students who we're teaching. The skill sets is a very helpful step towards the individual skills and the individual skills at age-appropriate levels. So that's quite a high level of detail and complexity. This is a helpful step from the cycle itself and the basic description of what is going on to that level of detail. Now, the second reason why this then becomes important is, so it's not only helps us to talk more knowledgeably and specifically about the kinds of skills that the stages involve. So even just, for example, then in investigate, yeah, you know, I'm guessing things like different types of sources and organization of information, there might be opportunities for us to work on that. I'm guessing we never really did a good job of teaching navigation and search strategies. And I think that's going to become even more difficult with AI. Yeah. But we do have an obvious concern, for example, with evaluation, selection, curation, and use of multiple sources. Maybe we don't do so much necessarily with perspective and point of view or strategies to make sense. But we may have opportunities, for example, with capturing information and thinking / note-taking, which, you know, the investigative journal always for us was and remains a very powerful tool, because that then bridges recording the information. So what information have you found? An opportunity to comment takes us into construct, an opportunity to comment on why that particular information, how that information is useful, what you're going to do with it. It shifts into construct. And then because at the point that we are looking at information and evaluating it, we need to be recording the details so that when it's time, we can cite and reference. So that one graphic organizer, even though we may be focusing very narrowly on one of these skill sets in investigate, is an immediate opportunity to provide them with a tool that will help them step into 3 stages of the process when maybe before we were only concentrating on one.
Yep.
So it's more about our conversation in the classroom with what we are providing than necessarily doing anything other than teaching the skill that we've been asked to teach, but helping the students understand that it's part of a process. It's the way you talk about this in front of your class rather than expecting them to do anything other than the skill that you're actually teaching them. It's helping them actually understand the bigger picture. So do you think that there's enough time in a classroom setting, Ruth, to be able to do that?
I think it's about familiarity and the number of times you can do that. So if I'm regularly, you know, if they see me regularly in various different classrooms, looking at different parts of the cycle, which is what I'm hoping that we are working towards at our school, then that conversation isn't so new every time. So you show, you know, so then I can say, you know what the FOSIL cycle looks like. This is the stage we're working with now. This is how it fits in. This is how it will feed on. The first time I have that conversation, that needs more time. But every time after that, it's a reinforcing. And therefore it doesn't need so long. You know, here's the cycle, this is where we are, this is why we're at that stage and where it's going. Yes, I think there is time for that, provided that that's kind of in their thought when they see me standing in front of the class. Oh, this is going to be about that. Where are we now?
So as far as, in order to do that properly, it needs to be integrated at a higher level. So teachers, senior leaders need to understand what it is and why you're talking about it, and almost the teaching staff need to be aware of it in order to help you embed it, I suppose. Is that the next step?
I think that's right. And I think that not only do they need to be aware of it, but we need to have the expectation needs to be that the departments, all the departments, will be engaging with this so that it properly, they don't need to be talking about it, I don't think. And I think this is where we've had the conversation before about for me, the pleasure of teaching in an IB school, and I would be pushed to move out of IB for this reason, that this is second nature. This is what an IB education is about. In my world, it's about skills and it's about reflection. And so when you talk in this way to IB teachers, that's nothing new. They're happy to accept this. They're happy for you to say, and the IB love a circular diagram, and here's a new circular diagram, so we're all okay. I can have those conversations. I'm expected, part of my job description is to teach the research ATLs, the attitudes, approaches to learning, which is the IB's version of this. And I did say to the IB when I spoke to them the other day, I don't particularly like the way that the IB approaches those skills, because from a research point of view, they are very muddled. They have a very narrow selection of things that they think of as research, and actually they're not they've grouped them in a particular way, which I don't think is very helpful. It's not helpful for the students, it's not helpful for the staff, and they get picked out like sweets by the staff because they are expected to teach ATLs in their curriculum. And it's a hugely complex process to map the teaching of those skills across, in our school, really across the MYP, so years 7 to 9. But that's part of my job role. Part of the expectation is that I will do that in combination with our MYP coordinator, and this is the best way to do it. But I have to explain to them that despite the fact that that ATL isn't marked as research by the IB, that's actually one of mine. Thank you very much. And I want to teach it in this way. I think with this kind of, with this approach, this is hugely helpful, this conversation, because it's really clarifying exactly that. How am I explaining to the teachers that I'm only coming in to teach this one tiny thing, but look how it sits in this cycle? And I can do that. I think I can see how that works, definitely.
Daryl, have you finished with the picture? Because we could take it off now and have a conversation.
I've just got one more thing to say about this.
Yeah.
So this picture is a very useful tool for working with colleagues, but in two different ways. So on the one hand, it's an opportunity for explaining where, at a greater level of detail, explaining where the stuff that we might have been invited in to teach about fits into a broader process, a learning process. So what we can't lose sight of is that where inquiry goes wrong is when we lose sight of one of the ways in which inquiry goes wrong is when we lose sight of the fact that it needs to be directed at important subject content. So it's an approach to learning about the subject that you're studying.
Yeah.
So that is teaching implications as well as learning implications. So if, say, for example, we have an opportunity to go in and we've been asked to teach something about evaluation, selection. Well, you see, I don't even think we really spend much time doing evaluation and selection of evidence within sources, because our focus tends to be different types of sources and the organization of information. So what that does do is when a teacher comes and asks us to do that, we're then able to say, well, actually, that is a skill set within Investigate, but there are also these broader considerations. So that conversation is an opportunity to help colleagues understand how complex the Investigate stage actually is. So if you think here, what did I find out? Broadly, that's what we're trying to do in Investigate. In order to be able to do that, these are the kinds of things that we need to pay attention to. Now, teachers may or may not have given any thought, for example, to capturing information and thinking / note-taking. So it gives us an opportunity to broaden their understanding of the thing that they've asked us to teach, while at the same time raising awareness of the fact that that is just a stage in the learning process. But then it also is an opportunity to identify identify opportunities, other opportunities for us to collaborate with colleagues. So say, for example, anybody who is doing anything on questioning, we are able to go to them and to say, well, actually, questioning is part of the process. It's here in the process. So what has come before, what has come after? So this may very well get, interest and prior knowledge, background knowledge and context. That is a starting point for a process. So this gives us an opportunity to have conversations with colleagues about the possibility of becoming involved at other points in the teaching and learning, beyond those that maybe we have traditionally been associated with, and possibly even limited to, and possibly even limited ourselves to. Because this really is and ought to be our area of expertise, the inquiry learning process, and an ever deepening understanding of what is happening in each of those stages.
Yeah, so for me, for example, questions is a lesson that I used to go in and help teach. But I wouldn't necessarily at that point, it was probably prior to being involved with FOSIL, I would have just thought it was part of the Investigate stage. But actually questions, as you can see on the screen, says that it's part of the Wonder stage. But it's creating the questions in order to be able to investigate, which is that's that thought process, isn't it? So yeah, being able to, the connect, wonder, and investigate all feels very simple and familiar to me, in the fact that, your background knowledge is important. What do you want to know through wonder? And now we're going to find out the answer to those questions is a very simplistic way to look at it. But when you've broken it down into all these different areas, actually there is more to it than just the investigate stage.
Well, and of course, the questions are one thing. I think what I really do appreciate about this is the thought that has been put into, and the logic of these skill sets.
Yeah.
So I don't think that these are random. So if you've got a question, you'd like to, because the question arises out of interest and prior knowledge, background knowledge, that is where the question comes from.
Yeah.
But at the point that you ask the question, you must have some sense of what the answer might be. You must have some sense of where you might find answers to those questions or information that will help you to answer those questions. And you think, for example, how many subjects in some form or another, so that then becomes a hypothesis or a tentative thesis. So how many subjects at various points in the school, even if they don't think they are doing an inquiry, are teaching those skills.
Yeah.
And even if that is just a conversation about, that's really interesting, because it fits into the process here, and because it's that leads into the investigation, that may very well create an opportunity to work with colleagues who we wouldn't normally work with, and possibly even departments. You know, you think, for example, that whole Year 6 signature work inquiry for us, that interdisciplinary inquiry, actually grew out of the unit on heat transfer in science. And the real focus for them there is the stuff that's happening in wonder. So, you know, is this thing going to keep something hot or cold? Or is it actually going to keep it hot and cold? Well, how are we going to find out? Now, in science, so that's a perfect example then, where in science, finding out is an actual practical experiment. So they are learning by designing an experiment and testing stuff. But in English, at the same time, they're reading nonfiction around heat transfer to inform themselves so that they're able to better design and conduct an experiment. And then that thing just works outwards from there. But that required an understanding of what was being taught when, and looking at that from the perspective of unexpected and maybe surprising opportunities to have conversations with colleagues who it then turned out were actually sympathetic to what we're trying to do and very excited about the possibility of contributing.
Okay, so then how do you find yourself in those conversations in the first place, Daryl? Sometimes I will be, very boring story, but the computers in the music department are broken. So at the moment, the music department are often in the library with the laptops. So, and when music are using the laptops, they must be doing research. So I know that Year 8 are working on a project based on the BBC 10 Pieces selection of music. There's research in that. Fine. Okay, so I know that there's an in. I haven't got to that point, that conversation with them, because that project is, that research is underway. There's no point in me joining in now. I need to think about that for next year, I think. But that's chance.
Mm-hmm.
I have asked at our heads of department meeting that each department nominates somebody who is their library person, that I am able to see all of their unit plans. We use a platform which should map their unit plans out for us.
Mm-hmm.
I don't find I'm any the wiser having looked at their unit plans. I find it very difficult to see that where those opportunities are. And I also find it slightly difficult to go to them and say, I've looked at your unit plans. You look as though you're doing this. What can I do? Because they're then in that sort of, well, we do that. We've done that for years. We know how that project works. We're not interested in shaking it up. Whereas if I'm in the library and they're doing research, that's easier to say to the teacher, when you do this next year, could we use this as an opportunity to look at X, Y, or Z? How have you engineered those or not engineered those situations so that you can see where those links and conversations are?
So there are two parts to that question. On the one hand, it has taken me a very long time to work my way deeper and deeper into this stance and mindset, to the extent where it's impossible for me to think about what is being taught and learned in any other way.
Mm-hmm.
So that has been a journey. So the more I've done it, the more natural it becomes. But still, there is a high degree of needing to be opportunistic.
Mm.
So you've identified a project. So your starting point can be, it's inconceivable that this isn't an inquiry.
Yep.
And I think the key here, which does actually begin to touch on, I think, our terminology, which is actually, I think, really important. And it's something that I've begun to do much more consciously now, is to make a distinction between an inquiry and research. So research is finding out about something very specific, whereas sorry, that
Sorry, the picture's gone.
I was startled.
We're back.
What what did I just say?
Research is finding out about something very specific.
Yes.
Inquiry.
Yes. So research is a much narrower and more linear process. And it's aimed at finding an answer to a question.
Yeah.
Whereas inquiry is broader and it's more open-ended. And the outcome is less predictable. So, you know, I'm thinking maybe that the heat transfer, for example, is a good example there of research. So what happens if I do this? So I can either design the experiment and I can test it myself, and I can find out for myself from the experiment, this is what happens when I do this. Or I can read about it. So somebody else has done that experiment. Hopefully I can go to the book hopefully I can go to the library, and if the library's collection is any good at an age appropriate level, if I'm interested in heat transfer, I ought to be able to find some information in the library about heat transfer. I can read about that, and I can find out what happens. Inquiry is broader than that, and it involves research, largely in the investigate stage. So that's the first thing. The second thing then is the issue of information literacy. So the other thing that I think we tend to conflate is inquiry and information literacy. And information literacy, again, is a narrower concern than inquiry. And the focus of information literacy is the information itself and the use that we put the information to, whereas inquiry is concerned about learning about something in the process of which we require information, and we need to be able to do something with it. but the concern is broader than that. So the reason why I say that is if you've got music students in the library, you know that they are doing research for a project, that ought to be, so it ought to be inconceivable that that research that they're doing is not part of an inquiry.
They're not doing research, they are doing an inquiry.
Yes.
Definitely.
Which
Research.
involves.
Yeah.
So there's an ideal opportunity. I don't think, because we're concerned with inquiry, not information literacy skills.
Yes.
There's an ideal opportunity. We're not needing to sell ourselves to our colleagues in terms of things that we can do. We're collaborators on the inquiry learning process, regardless of whether it's an IB school or not.
Yeah.
So there's an ideal opportunity to go to the music teacher and say, I have noticed this. I'd love to understand more about what it is that you're doing and how you're doing it, and how, how, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily say it this way, but, how is this an inquiry for you? What is your understanding of the inquiry process? What are the stages that you're stepping them through? What are the skills that... So there's a conversation, you're gaining insight into what it is that they're doing. And out of that conversation, it will then become clear that you have an understanding of the inquiry process, the stages in the process, more importantly, the skills, the skill sets and the skills in that process. And that may, next time, that may position a collaboration next time.
Yeah.
But it may not, because that may be the wrong teacher, the wrong department,
Yeah.
the wrong time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that is the kind of thing then, that opportunity that you could look for in other subjects with other colleagues at other times.
Yeah, absolutely. I suspect that while most teachers are very clear about what they want the students to find out, I suspect that most of them are not very clear about what the level of those skills looks like. And while we teach our year 7s Harvard referencing, they know that they should expect that, but I'm not sure what they think that might look like later on. And I think if I talk to them about finding resources, that's a very managed, tightly managed, well, no, it isn't a very tightly managed inquiry. It starts off as a very tightly managed inquiry because they are very, very focused where they can start, but where they go after that, I suspect isn't. So I think if I asked them what skills they were looking at, in that case, I think they're more focused on what the outcome, I suspect the teachers are more focused on what the outcome they expect looks like. And rather than, and then I suspect that they might look at the ATLs and think, okay, well, that we'll probably be doing some of that and some of that and some of that. And we often have a conversation about, our ATLs, so are these approaches to learning, these IB inquiry skills, are they being taught, or are they just being listed as something we are doing in this piece of work? And I think that is often the case, and that's where I've always thought that's my opportunity to step in and say, okay, well, you say that you are teaching note-taking. Are you actually teaching note-taking, or is this just an opportunity for the students to take some notes? Those aren't the same thing. So yes, I can see, but I think for me, probably the coin flip moment is that difference between research and inquiry, because teachers always talk about research and they talk about inquiry skills, but they don't have, and I didn't have clear in my mind the difference, although I have known and understood what you are talking about all these years and thought, oh, yes, 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 yes. But that very, very tight definition makes a huge difference.
And I think, I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb here, but I would be, from my experience over many years in many different contexts and talking to many different people from different contexts, I would be willing to bet a fairly substantial amount of money that many, if not most colleagues, consider a task where they are requiring the student to go away and find out something to be an inquiry, when that's not even research.
Yeah.
So I think that is both a massive challenge, but it's also a massive opportunity.
Yeah.
Because if you were to ask now that teacher, that music teacher may very well have a deep understanding of inquiry and have an inquiry process with clear stages, and it may also be that because an understanding of what inquiry actually is and how that differs from research, let alone information gathering, it may very well be that sending children away to go and find some information for themselves in their mind and possibly even in the school passes as inquiry.
Yeah.
I must admit, my experience back at school when I was teaching in school was definitely if you restricted the students to just look at one resource, to look at it well, to look at, to use it to do its note taking, to use it to really deeply understand what that article was about, rather than letting them go off and find out independently for themselves from the internet, that was seen as restricting the student's ability to become an independent learner. And actually that was a significant point for me, was the fact that there is a lack of understanding that independence only comes from real knowledge and understanding about the process itself, and being able to, once you've found a piece of information, be able to actually analyze it. So we're sort of moving in a circle, aren't we, from that go and find out for yourselves and cut and paste and give me the answer, to actually we want students to be able to use the inquiry process well and effectively to become independent learners.
But you see, I think that's where we fool ourselves, because go and find out about, even that is not the same as finding information about something. And it doesn't matter whether you've got one source or a million sources, because our focus is not construct, because we don't really wrestle with the process of making sense of information in investigate. So here's this thing that I found. So it doesn't matter whether it's one thing or a million things. This thing that I am reading, does it actually make sense to me? So the person who wrote it, am I able to make sense of what this person who wrote this thing is saying? And then I don't think we even really give any thought whatsoever on, so what does that mean? And that meaning is linked to the purpose of the inquiry. What is it that you are inquiring into? What are the questions that you are trying to understand and provide an answer to? So that's why if we don't spend enough time on connect and wonder, and that's missing, and we tend to ignore construct, then all we really end up with is fooling ourselves that going away and finding some information, being able to say whether that information is credible or not, being able to cite and reference it correctly, well, okay, that's inquiry. It isn't, and it's not even research. And that, as I say, I think is both a huge challenge, but also an opportunity.
And I'm going to take that opportunity to finish this podcast today, because I think that there are so many more questions. So, Ruth, if there's more, then we might have to come back.
I think we might have to come back. I feel as though I've just got started. Sorry.
No, that's good. That's good. Okay, so I will bring it to a close. If you are listening to this on Podbean, then do go across to YouTube and have a look at the video that we've done with this recording. The link will be in the show notes below. And as always, if there's any questions, we'd love to hear them. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so that you don't miss out on the next episode, when we will be discussing more, lots more, obviously. Thank you so much for listening.